Hello, everyone. As I said last time when I was teaching about end times, I'm going to deal with false prophets. And not just deal with false prophets, but in terms of identifying true prophets as well. So, one of the interesting things is I'm going to the book of Jeremiah, chapter 23. I'm going to read from verse 11 through. Probably might not get to the end of the chapter, maybe for a second part of that. So, what is interesting about in terms of the book of Jeremiah is that Jeremiah prophesied during just before the destruction of Jerusalem. And what you'll notice is that the similarities between Jeremiah and Jesus. Jeremiah is one who cried over Jerusalem, was known as the weeping prophet, because it was during this time that Jerusalem was going to be destroyed by the Babylonians, and they were going to be carried away into captive. And also, you see the similarity with Jesus. Jesus wept over Jerusalem because he could see what was going to happen. It was going to be destroyed, and also they were going to take into slavery and take into all areas of the world in terms of the Jews in AD 70. So you see in terms of similarities with Jesus and Jeremiah. In a sense, they were sort of end time prophets, right? So we see in terms of Jeremiah prophesying just before the destruction of Jerusalem and the captive of Judah, and how the people resisted that word, how he was put in prison. And but also interesting is that the number of false prophets that came up during the time of Jeremiah's prophecy. Because Jeremiah prophesied to say, look, just submit to the Babylonians, go out, because this judgment's going to happen. And they resisted that. And a whole lot of false prophets came from nowhere. And these are what are classed as in-house prophets, prophets who are paid for. They're very money orientated. So, but let's go into some of the characteristics of the false prophets, which spoke about with Jeremiah. Jeremiah 23 verse 9, it says, "Mine heart within me is broken because of the prophets. All my bones shake. I am like a drunken man, like a man in whom one has overcome because of the Lord and because of the words of his holiness." Now look at this interesting point here, is that the horrible thing about a false prophet is he misrepresents God. So if you look, for example, you have a good name, you have a level of integrity, and what happens is somebody goes around and misrepresents you. They go around and saying, oh, Lloyd said this, Lloyd said that, when he didn't say that. And so with the false prophet, more so with God, that you're misrepresenting God. You're saying that I'm speaking on behalf of God, and it's all lies. And so if you sit and think as an individual, as a human individual, how offended you are if somebody misrepresents you, what more God? And what action would God take against that individual who claims to be speaking on behalf of God? So it's interesting that Jeremiah, he loves God, he has a relationship with God, and he's feeling the heart of God. All right, so he says, mine heart within me is broken because of the prophets, all my bones shake. So there's a twofold aspect, emotional reaction with Jeremiah, where one, his heart is broken because of what they're doing to the God that he loves. But also there's a certain amount of fear what God's going to do to these people who misrepresent God. And that's why it's worrying. I've seen so many false prophets, more than I should be involved in, where you observe them. And I think these guys, they don't even know God. They certainly don't fear God, because they're quite easily to say God said this and God said that. And you see them manipulate for money, and hopefully as we go through, I'll give you some examples of that. So look what he says, for verse 10, "For the land is full of adulterers, for because of swearing the land mourneth, the pleasant places of the wilderness are dried up, and their course is evil, and their force is not right." Now let me show you something here. One thing with the false prophet, even though this situation was going on in the land, the false prophet never addresses it. If you look at a false prophet, he goes down the route or the path of least resistance. That's why if you notice with false prophets, they speak nice things, pleasant things, things that encourage, make people feel good. Yeah, even though the situation of the land was full of adultery, the false prophet never addressed it. A false prophet will go into a church, and that church may have particular issues, but the false prophet will never address it. They have no impact spiritually, no impact morally. And that's what you notice is there's no impact spiritually or no impact morally. They prophesy to the flesh. They prophesy to what people want to hear. They don't go against the grain. They don't go against the flow. So let's read on. For both prophet and priest are profane, yea, in my house are found their wickedness, saith the Lord. So nothing about false prophets is that morally they're living an ungodly life. All right, morally. That's why it's not surprised when you see these things happen with these false prophets, about these things come out about their lifestyles. So you'll find that in terms of the lifestyle, fortunately I've known true prophets, and they have a very high morality. They're very moral people. They're godly, have integrity, and a fear of God. You see, when somebody's called of God, there's a fear of God when it comes to the area of prophecy, because they're so fearful of misrepresenting God. They feel they have to get it right. They have to make sure they've heard from the Lord, because they do not want to misrepresent God. When somebody doesn't have a relationship with God, there's no fear of misrepresenting God, because they don't know God. Right? So look what he says. Let's go into the verse 12. Wherefore their way shall be unto them as slippery ways in the darkness. They shall be driven on and fall therein. For I'll bring evil upon them, even the year of the visitation, saith the Lord. And look at it. Let's read verse 13, because that will emphasize the point. It said, and I've seen folly in the prophets of Samaria. They prophesied in Baal and caused my people to err. Now, this is the thing about with false prophets. So somebody's living in sin, God convicts them in their heart, or there's an area of their life that God is really dealing with them and convicts them, and they're about to repent, and then the false prophet comes on and says, oh, you're a man of God, God is blessing you. It causes people to stray from the path that God would have them to go. So what happens with the false prophet? He brings about deception. He takes off that burden of conviction of the individual when God is actually dealing with that individual. He lifts that burden, because, well, boy, I tell you, I felt bad, but now the false prophets come in, and they don't say false prophet, but they say, when the prophets come in, the man of God has come in and he said, I'm okay. And this is a very dangerous role of the false prophet. He moves the person away from the will of God, where God may be dealing with that individual, convicting that individual, but then they come along and saying, well, you're okay with God, and things are good. Nothing's going to happen to you. All right? So let's go to verse 14. I have seen also in the prophets of Jerusalem a horrible thing. They commit adultery and walk in lies. They strengthen also the hands of evildoers, that none doth return from his wickedness. They're all of them unto me as Sodom, and the inhabitants thereof as Gomorrah. Now, this is the point I really want to emphasize, is that normally when you look at false prophets and who they go to, they're not really discerning who they go to. So sometimes you may see them speak to someone who's quite in an immoral situation, and they strengthen the hand of the evildoer. Now, what does that actually mean? We have a saying, you get some people, when they're wrong, they're strong. They're wrong and they're strong. And what they do, they strengthen the wrong of the individual. Yeah? So if, you've got godly counsel telling them, say, look, you need to change your ways, or God is dealing with the individual, the false prophet strengthens them. And it's interesting, the individuals who they go to. They will go to individuals who are out of the will of God. And, it's quite public, it's quite known about the individual. I'm not talking about judging, I'm talking about it's quite known. And they seem to go to these people and saying, God has really called you, God's really dealing with. So they strengthen them in their wrong. Yeah? They strengthen the hand of the evildoers, where that God would lead them another way to repentance. And I believe in Lamentations, I think Lamentations 2 verse 14 says they don't discover sin. The false prophet does not discover sin. And we're not talking about exposing people. The Bible doesn't really emphasize exposing. It's about bringing people to a place where they can get themselves right with God. We're not talking about shaming people, where you have to stand in front of everybody. And this is the thing about with false prophets. They love the public arena. They love the public arena. They don't do anything, say, look, God has given me a word in privately, call them aside and say, look, God's given me a word to speak to you. It's always in the public arena. Yeah, nice things. And people are excited and they want to hear their word. So, and this is the thing about the key thing is that don't discover sin, as in Lamentations 2 verse 14, and they strengthen the hand of evildoers. Look at the people. Look at the people the false prophets go to. And also you find as well, if you have a true prophet of God, people are not quick to run to them. Yeah? If you have a real true prophet of God, people are not quick to run to them. These guys, people run to them, they want to hear that word. But a real man of God, I remember hearing a story about a man who was a prophet, claimed to be a prophet back in the 60s. And big line of people queued up to get their word. And this person spoke and he said to this individual, you must stop sleeping with your secretary. But he didn't say it loud, but the people who were just behind him could hear. And by the time he turned around, all the people had gone out the queue. All right. So this person exposed them publicly. They sort of whispered in there, said, look, you must, but the person behind could hear. And by the time he turned around, everybody had gone out the queue. People don't run to hear a true prophet of God because they may say things that you may not really want to hear. So let's go through. Verse 15. Therefore, thus saith the Lord of hosts concerning the prophets, behold, I will feed them with wormwood and make them drink the water of gall. For from the prophets of Jerusalem is profaneness gone forth into all the land. And this is the danger of the false prophet. It takes down the morality of a people. It seeks to destroy, in terms of the moral fiber of the people that they speak to. And that's why you find is that with false prophets who go into a church, and this, let me just backtrack about the false prophets as well. You find false prophets are generally unaccountable. Like, when people when I was in leadership and people would come and say, oh, this person wants to come to the church, I ask them, where are you from? Who are you under? Who are you accountable to? And they seem to move around from different places to place to place. And they will tell you their fee. I had one person, I said to them, how do you want to play this? And what I meant was, after you preach, you want to give the altar call. And the person said, well, this is what I have, an honorarium. And then I would ask for the liberty to challenge the brethren to sow into the ministry. And basically what we find with false prophets, especially the ones who are quite experienced in their false prophecy, right, is that they normally have a set fee, all right? So they would normally have a set fee of money. And then they would have an agreement with the church. So sometimes if they don't have a set fee, they would have an agreement with the church that they would raise an offering and they would have 50% of that offering that they raise. So you will see these guys, they may come with their support group or their minister's aides or their armor bearers, whatever they want to call them, or their prayer covering or whatever. And that person would follow where the offering plate goes. So when that money's counted, they will have that person up there in that room where that money's counted to ensure that the money's counted and they get their right cut. Because false prophets, their focus is money. And when I speak of false prophets, I like to spell it like this. False prophets, P-R-O-F-I-T. P-R-O-F-I-T. And what you find, the focus is money. So if they come to a church, they will either come to agreement that they'll have a set fee, or if they don't have a set fee, they'll have, they will say to them, right, okay, I will raise an offering. And normally they give a lot of prophecy before they raise the offering, before the offering or after the offering, and then they will get 50% of that cut. All right. And if you observe, when you see that money being collected, look at the person. They'll have one of their guys follow where the offering goes. So when they take that money out, one of their people will follow, make sure they get their correct cut. All right. Okay. Somebody say, oh, I didn't know that. Well, that's how it goes. All right. Now, verse 16, thus saith the Lord of hosts, hearken not unto the words of the prophets that prophesy unto you. They make you vain. Now, here's the thing about it is, they make you vain. Now, as I said, I've had more experience of dealing with false prophets than I really I should have. But what you find with false prophets as well, they like to massage the ego. They like to tell you how great you are, how wonderful you are. Oh, come up here. Oh, you're a woman of God. And what they do, they normally check out the information about you before. So the kind of people they would prophesy about, for example, if there was one particular guy who come down, he had a reputation for knowing people's names and postcodes. And what he would do, he would come and before he started to prophesy, you'd get the money in the envelope, you have a name address on the envelope, and he'd pray for the envelopes. But what he was doing is actually look at the name and the address on the envelope. And he's praying and he's looking at the name and address and he said, right, oh, over there, that person over there, is there a Jane over there? And they have a postcode of, I don't know, B132SY. The person jumps up, oh, God knows me, to get excited. And but there's all these little scams what they do, all right? And then they start to guess. And if you notice, when they speak to the individuals, they're kind of guessing. They ask you questions. Are you going to university? Are you studying? Do you believe God has called you? Or they'll stand up and they speak in generalities, yeah? So they sort of try to move around, try to find out something that will hit a target. So they try and get a reaction out of you, yeah? So that's the key thing about false prophets, yeah? Is that they speak in generalities. So like, for example, they will go to a church and there's, say, 50 people and half of them are over the age of 60. And they say, is someone here with a bad back? Well, of course there's going to be someone here with a bad back. There's someone, they got their leg, is it their left leg? Their left leg, yeah. And you've got people over 70-year-olds, 8-year-olds there. Of course. So what you find is with the false prophet, they speak in generalities. And when they call a person, they normally ask them questions. And what they will say will tender to the flesh and not to the spirit. Okay? And you always see money involved. All right? Because normally when they prophesy, they ask for the money afterwards. So normally they do the prophecy first and then they get the money afterwards. Okay. And really I want to bring some of these things up which are relevant. And also we have the scripture and also share my experience in terms of dealing with these guys. Yeah. So they said, thus saith the Lord, verse 16 of Jeremiah 23, thus saith the Lord of hosts, hearken not unto the words of the prophets and that prophesy unto you. They make you vain. So I said, remember, they make you vain. And we know what vanity is. They like to pump up your ego. As one of his preachers said, he said they like to give ego massaging messages. Yeah. They speak a vision of their own heart and not out of the mouth of the Lord. Now, here's the difference. Remember saying about how what they would do, they would ask general questions. See, when God is, look, God knows your heart. God knows everybody. God doesn't have to ask you questions. Yeah? He doesn't have to ask you questions. He will tell you exactly how it is. Yeah? Now, let me give you an example. I remember about 13 years ago, I was going through a particular hard time and I was up in Nashville, Tennessee. And I was in the hotel about 24th floor in Nashville, Tennessee. And I was praying to God, show me a sign that you love me. Only me and God knew that. And this was August. Anyway, I came to church. For some reason, I had to be in church that Sunday. And this lady came up to preach. And she says, I don't know why, but God changed my message completely. And there's a lot, everything what she said was spot on, which probably won't get a chance to go into. Anyway, she called me out to the front and she began to say things that were spot on. I mean, I can't even tell you how exactly it was. And she said, by the way, that God, when you was in America, God heard your prayer. And some of the things she was saying was spot on there, and some things were fulfilled a month later. Yeah. You see, when you're speaking on behalf of God, there's no mistakes, there's no errors, there's no asking questions, because it's an authority, because God knows you. So he doesn't have to ask you questions. He will tell you. Yeah. Okay. All right. So verse 16 said, they speak out of that. They make you vain. They massage your ego. And they speak a vision of their own heart. So that's why you find when they're speaking a vision of their own heart, what they do, they ask questions, try to find out, they try to sort of, it's a bit hit and miss. Yeah. Just to speak give an example. Someone told me this story about this woman came along to prophesy. Saw this good-looking guy in a couple of rows away. She called him out and says, "Oh, God has called for us, me and you, to be together. We're going to have a powerful ministry together. The Lord's going to use us. We're going to go all over the world and we're going to minister." So the young man said, "Has God told you what I must do with my wife and my two kids?" You see, that's what I'm saying with false prophets. They go all around the place, and they but they're not accurate. They speak things that's off their own heart. So this woman saw this man. This is what the story was told me anyway. Saw this man, and she seemed to have liked him, and then tried to call him and seduce him through false prophecy. So they speak of their own heart, yeah, and not out of the mouth of the Lord. Now we're going to see the difference between a word from God and a word out of someone's own heart as we go into the scripture. Verse 17, they say still unto them that despise me. Now look at that. Let me just pause there for a moment. They say still unto them that despise me. What they're saying is to people who live a life contrary to the will of God, he said, everything's going to be okay. Nothing's going to happen to you. Everything's going to be okay. Be still. Going back to that previous scripture where it says they strengthen the hand of evildoers, look at the people who they prophesy to. False is attracted to false. Okay? False. That's why certain people the false prophet will not go to. My gosh, let me pause there for a moment, yeah? Is that certain people the false prophet will not go to because they know. You know, they have a term where they said real knows real. But I also add false knows false. Look who the false prophet goes to. There's certain people the false prophet will not go to because they know what could happen, that they would get exposed. Okay? So now look what it says, verse 17. They say still unto them that despise me, the Lord has said, you shall have peace. And they say unto everyone that walketh after the imagination of his own heart, no evil shall come unto you. So what you find is that there's no consequence with the false prophet. And I said, real knows real, false knows false. So they will go to certain people who will accept that word. They can look on their face, they know they'll accept that word. And they preach a message of no consequence. Everything's going to be okay. This very light word, vain words, pump you up, massage the ego. So he said, verse 18, for who has stood in the counsel of the Lord and hath perceived and heard his word? Who hath marked his word and heard it? Now look at verse 19, the consequence. Behold, a whirlwind of the Lord is gone forth in fury, even a grievous whirlwind. It shall fall grievous upon the head of the wicked. The anger of the Lord, verse 20, shall not return until he have executed, till he hath performed the thoughts of his heart, and the latter days he shall consider it perfectly. Verse 21, I have not sent these prophets, yet they ran. I have not spoken to them, yet they prophesied. Let me stop there. Part 2 tomorrow.